for the final Mckinley School presentation. Before we get started on the final presentation, I do want to make some introduction. We have a lot of people here that are very interested in the outcome of this building for the city as a community space. So I would like to introduce the Mayor of Revere, Brian Amerigo. Thank you for joining us tonight. We also have City Councilor at Large, Mark Silvestri. Thank you as well. Ward 4 Councilor Patrick Keith. For the school department, we have Superintendent of Revere Public Schools, Dr. Diane Kelly. We have the Director of Curriculum for students from grades kindergarten to 3rd, Joanna Rizzo. For school committee, we have the Chair of the Facilities and Maintenance for the school committee, John Kingston. Also joined with us is Michael Ferranti and Stacy Rizzo. And we'll have to get you a title. And I also want to introduce our city staff that's also here with us tonight. We have the City of Revere Chief Financial Officer, Richard Biscay, and then the Director of Planning and Community Development, Tech Lang. And I also want to extend a special thanks to Principal Lomas of the Hill School for allowing us to use the school tonight. So before we turn the much anticipated presentation over to Elise and Sophie from Studio Luz, I just want to give you a little brief agenda of what's going to happen tonight. So Studio Luz will be presenting the findings of the community process for the Mckinley School. And then we'll talk a little bit about the site and the analysis of what can be done at the building. And then we're going to walk through the space configurations. After their presentation, myself and my colleagues, Tech Lang, we're going to talk about next steps and how we're going to position this building to be a community space for the City of Revere, and how this is going to, I don't want to say fast track, but we're going to do our best to move this project along and get it habitable for people, for early childhood education, for workforce development, community space, maker space. We're very excited. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Sophie and Elise from Studio Luz. And we also have Andres, who's going to be here for anybody who needs translation services. So thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having us. I'm Sophie, and this is Elise.
I'm the project manager on the project, and Sophie is the designer and community engagement liaison. And we are also joined by Andreas Jimenez. If anyone in the audience needs translation services, you can just raise your hand, and he can come down and help translate throughout. Thank you.
So sort of the structure of our presentation, we're going to give about a 15-minute presentation of the project introduction, the site analysis as we've done it, the community engagement process, and then we'll get into the space planning proposals, and afterwards we'll have sort of the next steps from the City of Revere, and then some time for open discussion and review of the plans that are presented on the board, as well as opportunity to give comment, and we'll record it in a Google Doc and include that as an appendix within the report for additional feedback of the space planning proposals. So the ReImagining the Mckinley School project is a partnership between the City of Revere and Mass Development to create a new vision for the Mckinley School that will benefit the surrounding Revere community, which is based off of community input and the pragmatic needs of the city. We have been requested as Studio Luz to support the reprogramming of the McKinley School. As it stands currently, the McKinley School is closed due to the new school opening a block away. It was originally designed for about 350 students, and the needs of the city grew to about 570 students, so there's a need for a new facility to support that, including the fact that there's only a single set of bathrooms located in the basement of the school with no cafeteria space or kitchen facility to serve the students, as well as no gymnasium.
And it's also really important to note that the school has sat vacant since it closed in 2014, so it's a really great time to start thinking about what it could be and what it could do for the city, seeing as it is located sort of in the heart of the city here in Revere.
And so the mission of the project is to transform the school into a beacon of accessibility and repurpose the vacant building for education and community programming, as well as creating spaces for entrepreneurship to thrive and support a network of economic mobility, including workforce training for individuals 18 to 45, so that transitional workers and the next generation are not left out of a growing job market, as well as serving a community asset for seasonal art and performance events that are in tandem with additional Revere programming for public and performing arts that is going on with the high school. So our site analysis was to sort of understand how the McKinley School programming could complement new programming at the Suffolk Downs redevelopment, the new Revere High School, as well as the Revere Food Hub project to fulfill workforce and educational programming needs for the city. And so the Suffolk Downs programming was for innovation centers, training, and entrepreneurship facilities, including retail, residential, office spaces, as well as laboratory and hotel. The new Revere High School has the High School Innovation Center, and the Revere Food Hub has commercial-grade kitchen, year-round farmers market, and food service educational courses and career certification trainings. And you can see on the map how those are located in relation to where the existing McKinley School structure is.
And so we're really seeing this as part of a larger network and seeing how we can connect and be part of that network to both support the new programming at the Suffolk Downs, the high school, and the food hub, but also create sort of a draw in the center of the city here as well.
And this is really important to note in relation to multi-generational programming and how the new programming at the McKinley School will include multi-generational uses and create these flexible spaces that will accommodate a wide variety of programming so that it can be a hub and draw people from all demographics to this location because it is so centrally located. So the community engagement process included 4 in-person and virtual community workshops, as well as a public input page hosted by the City of Revere to engage community members and stakeholders, while also providing asynchronous options so that as many voices as possible could be heard and provide input on what this programming should be. And from 57 community responses, these were the top 3 responses of what people would like to see, including community and community education spaces, with 63% of the respondents wanting that as a priority, 50% of respondents wanting early education spaces, and 48% of respondents wanting to prioritize performing arts and gallery spaces. And when people walked through the door, what was important for them to see was information related to opportunities happening here and in town, particularly in a digital format that is up to date and synchronized across platforms, so that this can really be a hub for people to get access and information resources across the city. So infrastructure supporting that, as well as artwork and displays, and a smiling face that is welcoming when you walk into the space. So as the primary programming in response to the community engagement process and feedback from stakeholders in the community, the primary program for the McKinley School will be early education and child care spaces, surrounded by a network of community center and community education spaces, including a wellness programming, community classrooms, multi-purpose spaces, workforce training spaces in a smaller nonprofit tenants sharing uses within that community workforce and social services hub, and then performing arts spaces and community art assets such as a performance stage, music studio, and gallery spaces. And so these 3 sort of create a constellation around the early education care to create a really vibrant and diverse multi-generational space that can draw members from all the community into the center of town. And so we can go to the next slide and look at the program breakdown. So the total building square footage is about 36,600 gross square feet, of which 12,000 is unoccupiable square footage, mainly dedicated to circulation. And then we have proposed keeping approximately 85 of the existing building footprint and splitting that square footage by early education as about 50% of the usable square footage, with the remaining being allocated to community asset, with a small workforce training selection in part of the footprint as well. Looking at the site plan, we've sort of built on what is already there and extended the programming from the early education care and community asset spaces to the exterior of the building through maintaining the basketball court that is already there, and then adding a playground that would be used for the early education center, as well as community garden space to promote healthy food options, as well as it can provide an educational opportunity in tandem with the early education care, which is something that, a synergy that was heard in the community workshops as well that we wanted to reflect. So on the basement, it is split between workforce training spaces as well as community asset space, and the multi-purpose format of the community asset space could support informal open community gatherings and places to socialize for several different multicultural events and programming opportunities. And this is something that can sort of be looked at in the next steps, is what programming opportunities and what should happen which nights, and how that space can be occupied by different organizations and whoever would like to host their organization's events at that point.
And you can see in the multi-purpose rooms, we've created a variety of spaces, scale and both in setup, so that you can really have the flexibility for whatever the community would see in those spaces. And so creating bifold walls between the three rooms, you could open it up completely and have larger community events, or you can close it off to have three separate spaces for three different community programs happening at the same time. And so we saw providing this sort of flexibility for the community would be really useful, as we heard many different things from the community of how they could see it being used. For one example was senior night. Another example could be foreign language services. So really providing that flexibility in the space and how the space is organized to support how the community would want to use it.
And then on the first floor, when you walk in, we heard that a lobby that is bright and welcoming and a hub for information is sort of the first thing that you would see when you walk into the space. And then on one side of the floor plan would be the first section of early education and childcare spaces, including principals' offices, classrooms, and indoor sensory gym. And then on the other side, creating community asset spaces of community classrooms with a dedicated childcare room off to the side from those community classrooms, which is something that was heard as a priority for events, particularly with families, so that parents and people with children can have a space where they can dedicate their focus while their children are taken care of, and that's not a concern or a distraction to them participating in community activities. Additionally, on the hallway, there are smaller breakout spaces that can create some more intimate one-to-one or single-person interactions or meetings. But then again, in the classrooms, as we kind of programmed on the basement floor, we're looking again at multifunctional spaces and flexible classroom sizes that can, through bifold walls, accommodate 4 to 6 people versus groups up to 8 to 12 people in more formal around the table classroom settings, so that there is again that flexibility for the type of community education and workforce training activities that need to happen.
And you'll also see on plan left here that we would recommend adding ADA accessibility to the entire building. So right now there is currently no ramp access and no elevator. So we would recommend adding both a ramp coming from the parking area and an elevator throughout all 4 stories of the building, as well as adding ADA accessible restrooms on each floor to really make sure that this is a center for everyone in the community and that everyone has access to it.
And then the second floor would primarily be dedicated to early education and care, particularly some larger classroom spaces, evaluation suites, as well as support spaces such as a teacher's lounge, with some smaller breakout spaces, again, seeing the hallway as sort of a workforce training asset as well, and smaller individual breakout spaces along that hallway so that there is a communal and interaction between different groups. And then on the third floor, this whole space is being visioned as a performance art and community asset, where the performance art space could be an open performance hall that seats up to 50 people, but there's also and interaction from the art studio on the left and the music studio on the right, and whether that becomes a more flexible performance space for an art gallery event or a concert or whatever smaller performance and art programming would happen, and leaving room for the more higher like occupancy requirements to be done in conjunction with the Revere Public Schools performing arts program. But this is a separate asset for other programming needs. And so taking a look at sort of how the welcoming reception space could provide digital displays for information that could be translated across different platforms, including the website and this digital asset, as well as creating a bright and vibrant space that is, again, the lobby for the early education and care as well. And so prioritizing sort of that vibrance and the information. And then looking at how the performance art studio space translates in the visibility across and between the art studio and the stage, and creating an open, flexible space that can support multiple types of programming.
So you can see sort of the bones of the building are still here. We're keeping 85% of the existing footprint, but then adding in elements in key areas that can really make it flexible for the community needs, and also just liven up the space completely so that it is a place that people want to come to and that draws people into this part of Revere, both through its programming and through the experience inside as well.
And so looking at next steps and where we go from this initial space planning study, given that the survey lists community education spaces as a top priority, there's been discussion in some of the workshops that the early education care would provide opportunities for Revere High School students for internships due to their proximity to the Mckinley School, as well as opportunities for the Mckinley School to establish a workforce training program partnership with Suffolk Downs for an employment pipeline with jobs that would support the city of Revere. And as a next step, financial and space analyses would need to be conducted to measure Revere's current and projected early education care student population to understand whether the proposed early education classroom space is adequate for the next 5 to 10 as well as the next 25 years, and how that would fit into the larger needs of the city for early education spaces. And as Elise touched on, the multicultural programming in the basement multipurpose room can serve the multicultural communities it relates to foreign language support or ESL services or a senior night. And so this is an opportunity now to start identifying the partnerships of who would be invested and interested in using that space, so that the design process can really evolve to support that type of programming and take those stakeholders into consideration. And Studio Loose is recommending that a request for proposal be drafted by the City of Revere to outline a request for services for the feasibility and conceptual study, followed by the full architectural and engineering services for a public bid process to bring this project to the next phase and through the next steps to bring it to fruition. Thank you.
And so I know it's a little bit blurry up here, so we also have 4 boards placed around the room if you want to take a closer look. And then we would like to hear all of your feedback as well. So there's a mic here, but I'll hand it over to Julie before that.
So there are a couple of points of this presentation and in the final report. In the first community meeting, there was a lot of requests for commercial kitchen space, for lounge, incubator space, for cooking, urban farming. We heard that throughout the community meetings. And what we didn't reveal at the time is that they're already currently being studied at the former League of Special Needs, which is now the new Revere Food Hub, which we're very excited. There was funding through Mass Development to get that building habitable, to start putting in some of the programming that the Food Hub team would like to see. So yes, we will have commercial kitchen space and incubator space and urban farming and all those great things, but that will not be part of the McKinley School programming. And we will be forwarding everything that was collected through the community process related to the Food Hub to that Food Hub team. In addition to that, we got a lot of requests for some community space for fitness and health classes, space for toddlers to preschoolers to do art classes and different activities like that. At the same time as the food hub is being developed, we're also the city is in the process of building out the Robert J. Haas Community Health and Wellness Center, which will feature a lot of those additional classes. So we really want to make sure that this space is unique in the programming that it offers. There may be some overlap, but we're really trying to prevent that and allow for the programming to happen at spaces that can provide everything that it needs to let those programming run, such as the food hub and as the Robert J. Haas Community Health Center. And then lastly, we got a few requests for a pool at the space, and we have the city has just recently taken over the management of the aquatics programming at the George B. Colella Community Center, which is at the Garfield School, and I know that they have the continuation of the Learn to Swim programs. They're going to have open swim for adults, aqua aerobics programming, so that's where that type of programming will take place. And I want to just kind of bring to everyone's attention, there will be a city team working together to move the project forward. It'll be a combination of city staff, school department staff, the mayor, obviously. But the next step's really to make this building into the community space that has been talked about tonight is to do some feasibility analysis of what is going on in the building. So structural analysis, environmental analysis, handicap, ADA, accessibility analysis. We are going to be working on that, kind of getting some ideas of what all of that will cost, but that really is the next step. Once we have those studies in place, then we'll start going after some really big funding, understanding what it's going to take to rehab this building into the space we all want to see. So I am going to open the conversation up to any comments or suggestions or just feedback on what's being presented here tonight. As in the past, we're always open for suggestions. If you leave the meeting tonight, you can reach us through the Mckinley School public input page, but I really encourage you to take a look at the boards, look at the space, how it's been configured, provide any feedback you may have here tonight or later on. Pat?
Thank you for the presentation. Great job. I did have a question in regards to, I'm very happy with the more spaces to me, well, I shouldn't say more important, one of the more lovable spaces to me is the theater. Would there be an ability to make that one a larger space, even maybe with some flexible, expandable doors, so that it could open up to a larger theater that might be more suitable for an actual production?
So I think
Thank you.
So the Studio Lou's intention is to sort of have this smaller, flexible performance space that suits that 50 to 60 person. We are kind of constrained in trying to maintain about 85% of the building footprint, but in creating those two auxiliary spaces on either side, the idea would be that there is some flexibility in terms of how those spaces would ebb and flow into one another and create that. And then I know there's also some sort of larger performance and production space through the Revere Public Schools with the high school program that was planned. And so I think that's sort of the relationship that would be anticipated for something that's a little bit of a larger scale, was that that would be the avenue, and this is suiting a different need that is sort of required.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Do we have any other questions about the process or the community input? Diane?
Just a quick question about the parking. Is that going to be behind the current building, or what's the vision for that?
So right now the parking is currently behind the building, and so we've gotten a lot of requests to leave the basketball court. I know that the request has been from Revere Public Schools to have a playground that is its own separate facility and access to and from the building. I don't know, but I don't know what the capacity is. This is a decision and a discussion we need to have with the parking department related to those spots in and around the basketball court. I think we are able to put in some additional spaces there. I just don't know how many. Now, right now, the school, that lot is actually deemed an alternative lot or an emergency lot, so obviously it's no emergency and residents have to park their car. They can park there. The only part of that space that is not utilized is the old parking for the Mckinley school. That staff parking in the back. And I think right now we figured in about 34 spaces in the back. I think we would be able to put in some additional spaces on the side. Because we will need parking, for the residents. We've been creative working with the parking department to figure out how to do shared parking, so it serves one purpose in the day and then it becomes a resident parking at night, and that seems to be working out well, but there's a lot of public input that has to go into that as well. Yeah. John?
Oh, hi. Dr. Kelly stole my question, but I have two others. One was the concern was the early childhood as far as locking them off so they'd be safe. That was one question. And the second one was, are there any thoughts of taking that home that's there to create some more space in that lot? There's a house on Boston Street.
So blocking off the early childhood, that is something that will be done through the configuration of the stairways and the stairwells. And in terms, these are just renderings, so in terms of giving more space to one area to the other, that's still up for discussion, so it could be a possibility. Yeah. Michael?
Julie, are we definitely doing a rehab or a gut job, or we just have to wait to see what the plans come back?
I think right now, I think ultimately the building will be somewhat completely gutted. But the building itself, it's solid brick in some places.
Right.
You're looking at 20 inches of solid brick wall, a good 12 feet long. So I don't really know how you're going to take all that out for a complete gut. But I think we just need to see what's really going on there when we start pulling things away. I think structurally, the roof, the outside walls, exterior walls, the bearing walls, all of those seem to be pretty strong and structurally sound. But we'll just have to see what's going to have to happen on the inside.
And do you have like a timeline that once you get started, how long would roughly take? I know you said maybe the end of this year. How long would it take to rehab the entire building project?
So I think it's really going to come back to how quickly we can get the assessments done. I think from a community planning standpoint and an early childhood planning standpoint, I think we are hoping that this will be somewhat operable by 2024, 2025. I think that was the original, that's your timeline, Dr. Kelly, right, for the early childhood. I think the other thing that we need to really be mindful of is that all of our other swing spaces, and I call them swing spaces, is basically high school, all of the programming that occurs there at night they're out of space. We're hearing a lot from people saying, I would love to be able to bring this type of programming in. However, we have no place to put them. And so we're really missing out on some key opportunities, pathway, pipeline, project programming, early childhood programming. So I think, the key is to hopefully have this somewhat operable by 2024, 2025. I mean, if we could do it tomorrow, it's like that, we would, but it's going to take a little while.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody have that, Mark?
Will this be a community-based like scheduling? Will they be scheduling up for like what's happening and when, and will there be availability for residents to actually take part in running their own type of classes, language and stuff like that?
Yep, that will all come into play once we figure out the layout of the building and the type of operation that's going to happen there. I think one of our initial discussions with Dr. Kelly in the school department was that she really wants the space to be available to residents even though early childhood is going on, which is huge. Just the availability for young parents to be able to, if the child's enrolled in the early childhood programming, to go take a workforce development class or to, develop some sort of work plan for their own business while the kids are in school. So that's going to be huge. How that will all operate and the availability of time and space, that will come later. But the key is to make it as available and accessible to all residents that need it for their intended purposes. But I think right now the main focus really is to get the building up and running and functional so that the community can use it. Rich?
If the building's 36,000 square feet and 12,000 unoccupied, what's the industry average right now for renovations on unoccupied and occupied space so we can get an idea what this may even cost? That's more for the architect.
Okay, yeah. Did you get it?
I think we would have to come back at the numbers, but I know new construction is around like $300 to $350 a square foot for ground up new construction. But I know that right now with inflation, all of those numbers, everything is really in flux, and so I think we would have to come back and give you a more accurate.
A renovation more or less than 350 a square foot?
Less. Yes.
Does that work for you, Rich?
Not really, but we know it's less than 350, I guess.
I think one of the biggest...
Well, we can talk about all this stuff, but we got to figure out what it's going to cost, right?
I think one of the biggest concerns right now with just the way the market is and the supply chain is that everything is through the roof. So, maybe by the time we do go out for construction for this, the prices will come down, the supply chain will have stabilized, we won't be looking at some real astronomical numbers and global issues and concerns. So hopefully by the time this does go up for construction, maybe we'll get a little break. Maybe it could come down. What has been the increase you've seen in construction renovations? What is the percentage you think?
I couldn't give an exact percentage, but
Yeah.
I think it's also something that, given that we haven't gone through a full feasibility study of the condition of the building and knowing what's there, it's really hard to give an accurate estimate of what that square footage price would entail, and that's something that would be involved with the cost estimator at that point to really get an accurate number. But to just throw out a number is sort of difficult without understanding exactly what is there and how much would need to be pulled out in place.
Okay.
So.
Anybody else have any other questions, concerns? Okay, well, I encourage you all to take a look at the boards that we have here. Tonight's presentation will be on our public input page. The final report will be on the public input page. But I want to thank everybody for taking the time to join us tonight. And we're excited for the next phase of the McKinley School rebuilding process, reimagining process, and I think at the end of all of this, we're really going to have a great community space that's going to be widely used by the whole community. So we're very excited. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Can we exit in an orderly fashion?